Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Married to a Shrink. I'm Allie, the shrink in the Married to a Shrink dynamic of our marriage and this podcast and all of those types of things. And alongside me for this conversation is my husband and partner, Michael. Michael, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Hey y'all, Michael here. Looking forward to this conversation. This one should be an interesting one.
And an uncomfortable one for you maybe too.
Yes.
So we segued in last time, but this is our conversation about sex. Sex in marriage, sex in partnership, sex when parenting, and all of that type of thing. And if you've listened to other episodes, you also know that sex and things surrounding sex are a discomfort for Michael. Accurate still, or have you gotten a little bit more comfortable?
I've gotten a little bit more comfortable, but it's still an area of discomfort. I'm going to be definitely a little vulnerable today. My face may turn red. If my parents are listening or your parents are listening, I apologize.
Oh, it's always so old school. I love it. Okay, so how would you describe your view around sex and sex in, well, just sex in general, in relationships and...
Sex is fun. It's an opportunity to connect with your partner. For me, it's a pretty sacred thing. It's something I only have ever done with my serious partner.
Yeah. So, which is a little bit different for me, where I would say I am much more casual about sex. Would you?
I would agree.
Would you agree with that? So, because for you, sex it's more than just fun and pleasure. For you, sex is also what you do when you're in love, and it's a connector, and elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. I think, intimacy is, you being in your most vulnerable state with your partner. You're unclothed, and it's an opportunity to just feel closeness, both from a physical sense, but from an emotional sense.
And where I have always aligned a little bit differently, where for me, sex doesn't have to be associated with a relationship, and it also does not have to be associated with intimacy. Sex can also be a little bit more, I hate to use this word because it can come across as graphic, and I don't mean it to be, but a little bit more primal, a little bit more just about having fun and experiencing pleasure without the association or the mutual tie to it of the intimacy and the connection and the other components that are associated with sex in your purview, right?
Correct.
And you use the word intimacy, and I want to make sure that we don't entangle the two, because intimacy is an overarching dynamic that often in romantic relationships has sex included, but intimacy isn't exclusive to just the act of sex. And so intimacy is more. Like you can have sex and not have intimacy, and you can also have intimacy and not have sex as part of that dynamic, right? So I want to make sure we utilize
Agreed.
that diction.
Agreed. I'll be mindful of that during our conversation today.
Because I know for you, they are intertwined. You don't have sex without intimacy. But I know for myself and for other people, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, right?
Understood.
And so what would you say is how has our sex changed from when we were first dating to where we are now?
I think a lot of married couples will sympathize with this, but I think the frequency has gone down compared to when we were dating. It was, you sometimes say that I glorify it, but it seemed like it was a daily occurrence in our honeymoon dating phase. It's still compared to the statistics, I think we still have sex more often than most couples or many couples, but it's not as frequent as it once was. I think a certain amount of comfort, and it's, early on in our relationship, it still is. Sex is something I have trouble discussing. It's like a sensitive topic, but I've definitely have grown more comfortable in expressing my wants, my interests, my desires, than I was when we were first dating. So I think that's a big change that's taken place.
Why is it so uncomfortable for you to talk about?
I don't know if it was growing up as a good old boy in a Catholic home. It was not something that we ever talked about. I never had to sit down with my parents about the bees and the birds, or
You said it the wrong way, but the theme was there. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear you. Birds and the bees.
birds
but
and
yeah.
bees. I never get those things right. I think that stems from a lot of it. A lack of experience with sex up until, really becoming an adult. And I think a lot of my sexual education came from pornographic movies, as
I
a
wouldn't even say
college
pornographic movies, just
movies, Hollywood.
Hollywood.
Yeah. Fair.
Which is a lovely, accurate depiction of
How love works and how sex works. Yes.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so, I mean, yes, to the frequency. I think it does shift, and that's with every couple. I think it's particularly for couples who are also parenting, right? Because I think frequency was much more when I was also not having to be a primary parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I just have to work a job and then take care of you, it's very different than having to, work a job, take care of you, plus a lot of other needy little peanuts out there who suck a lot of that emotional energy and stuff. And I think also, for me personally, and this may not be for everyone, but I will be vulnerable and do a little self-disclosure here. I think for me, whenever we were first started to date and I was able to really enjoy sex in a way that was more lust-filled and less of that emotional component, I was able to maintain more of a frequency and more of an intensity, and we could have sex every day or every day or other day or something like that. Because as our relationship progressed, and we've talked about, there were a number of hurts and pains that our marriage and our relationship suffered. And what happened to our sex life is that it felt like because you tied sex with also intimacy and emotional vulnerability, where I was just like, I just want to have fun. I just want to have pleasure. I just want to kind of disassociate in sex and not feel the relationship, invest in the relationship, and connect in the relationship via sex. I just wanted to have some release and some fun during very stressful periods of our relationship, where you would utilize that time to try to re-engage with me. And that created a dynamic that was really challenging to our sex life. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Because you were unable to disassociate that time of just like, we can be, I can be frustrated with you, or feel disconnected from you, and I just want to be blunt, I just want to have an orgasm and experience like some fun. And but you were always trying to utilize that time to like not win me back. I hate to use that term, like, but like to, oh, this is the time that we're going to connect and I'm going to right my wrongs and I'm going to, and I was just like, I don't want this right now. And so it would just block me sexually. Does this make sense? Because again, I think that comes with I don't want to say the disconnect, but our difference in perspective sometimes, or our feelings around sex. Or for you, it's always has to be a connector. And for me, it can be yes and. It can be or, right? It can just be pleasure and fun, and it can be connecting, right? But I feel like because the two have always been tied for you, it did really kind of challenge our sex life whenever we were going through stressful periods. So care to kind of elaborate?
No, I think that makes complete sense looking back. I mean, for you, a lot of times it was strictly physical. And if I tried to attach something emotional to it and we weren't at a point in that moment where we were on the same page, it's kind of, as you would say, off-putting.
Yeah, I would get sexually frustrated because I'm just like, okay, our life is so hard right now, and all I want is some fun and just some like pleasure with the man that I love. Like, I don't want all the bells and whistles and the trimmings. And like, I don't want the connection because I'm mad at you. I'm frustrated with you. I'm hurt by you. Right. And it was just, and so that for me is when our frequency, I feel like, really shifted.
I think I would say that's a fair assessment. I think, and as you mentioned, there was outside external forces that also came in that created that tension, that frustration, some of that disconnection.
Yeah. Yeah. And so besides parenting, what other stressors do you feel like affect the sex lives of people?
I think body image. I've, I mean, we've talked about it. I think you've gotten a little bit more. You
No.
don't think you've gotten a little more self-conscious?
I have gotten more self-conscious about, as I'm a year and a half shy of 40, I have gotten more self-conscious about, I'm not going to say self-conscious. I have become more aware of my shift in body.
Okay,
Right?
self-aware, yeah.
But I would challenge the notion that it has ever made it where I have not had sex because of my body image. I can't think of a single example. I have said no to sex because I am frustrated with you and because you struggled with consent for a long time, and we'll get to that. And where I felt like I wasn't being seen and heard, and consent was not present, and you would get mad about that. And so I would shut down sex. And like, I would also not want to be vulnerable with you during certain types of sexual experiences. But I can't think of a time where I was like, no, I feel I don't like my body. And so therefore we're not going to have this sexual experience.
I would 98% agree with that statement. I was speaking to more general terms about some other reasons that
Oh, that's
couples
fair.
may struggle with sex.
That's fair. So, because we can't think of an example in our relationship, tell me what your perspective is.
With
With
regards,
that, yes, you brought it up as an example,
I think,
and
I
then you
think,
couldn't relate it to me. So I'm like, where are you going with this, babe?
I mean, I think, I can see how if you're not confident in your own skin, being able to express your desires or feel good about taking off your clothes and being just vulnerable and exposed, I can see that as very scary for some folks. I think, thinking, I think the first sexual experience in a relationship um, can be uncomfortable, or have, I don't think ours was, I, but I could see how it would be for a lot of folks.
Okay. Anything else?
I mean, you mentioned children. Um, I mean, like you said, sometimes it's just the primal act of having sex and having an orgasm. Um, but outside forces that are in your mind, sometimes it can be difficult to be present in the moment. And I think that can be, uh, a barrier to having orgasm. I mean, obviously, there's folks that, um, struggle with medical issues, uh, erectile dysfunction, or things like that. It's obviously a barrier for some couples, not with ours, but certainly something that some folks struggle with.
So I think from what I have seen with the couples that I've worked with over the last 10 plus years is really there are some body image issues, but that tends to come up much less as opposed to trust. If when people don't feel like they can trust their partner, they with their emotional or physical safety, that tends to be one of the largest barriers I've had to work with couples on in navigating sex. History of trauma is another big one that we have to navigate when it comes to creating the sex life that people want. And then I would say that the outside stressors of parenting, finances, and work are the three biggest towards sexual desire and really having the desire to have sex. Now, I'm taking off the table mental health. Oh, I shouldn't say mental health. Everyone has mental health. A mental illness diagnosis of depression or anxiety, those also can very much affect sex drive, right? And so, but when people are associating their sex drive with their, let me not say when they're associating, when they're coupling their sex drive with where the relationship is or the progression and the trust and all of that, that's where people really get muddled in their ability to maintain like healthy sex lives and the sex lives that they want to have. Because I know we have talked at length about this, but because I feel like you can get very caught up in what other couples are doing and what is statistically what is normal and what is all that, which is really a challenge for me because as a therapist, I firmly believe and I'm very passionate about the notion that you create the healthy relationship that works for you, right? And that everyone is different. People have different histories. People have different views on sex itself, like we do. People have different things they're wanting from romantic relationships. For some, they want frequency, but they don't want the intimacy component of it. They may not want sex really at all, but they really want the companionship, right? There's a number of ways you can create and model a relationship. And this is just with a monogamous relationship. We haven't even gone to the places where for the ethical non-monogamous types of styles, what the different dichotomies and options are there. I'm just talking about right now in a monogamous relationship because that's what we're in. But I think there can sometimes be a disconnect for me when I come from the perspective of we create whatever we want. Our relationship needs to be unique to us, our frequency, and our what we are doing. And when it comes to the sexual activity, and all of that is for us to decide and for us to figure out and for us to have conversations around if one of us isn't satisfied. However, I feel like a lot of your notions based around sex make that challenging, right? Like your education coming from movies, or you speaking with other people, or this is what it's supposed to be, or you only having sexual experiences with people that you are in long-term relationships with, right? And what else kind of influences that disconnect sometimes between me having the ideology that we create what works for us and we have conversations around it when it doesn't, and you utilizing other influences and then just not having conversations around it when it's not working. Kind of elaborate on that a little bit more.
I mean, your statement's accurate in the sense that I don't know how to go with this.
So I'm just going to say I'm going to call out, because again, I'm the stinking therapist. It feels a little tense right now. Like are you feeling that?
I don't know. Tense isn't the word.
I know you're uncomfortable, but I feel like, yeah, I feel tension from you. Like
I don't
there's
want
not a defensiveness, but just like I'm not sure.
I don't want to portray tension. There's a certain amount of discomfort and a vulnerability feeling. I can sympathize with what you're saying, that, my outside influences, and I have expressed in the past the frequency question in terms of what's normal, what's not, what's healthy. And I can agree that every couple carves their way, and when it's not working for both partners, there needs to be a discussion. And, we've navigated that, and I think we're in a good place with our sex life.
But we've navigated that after some very, I would say, heated conversations that I had to broach and bring up because boundaries were crossed. And we had to navigate that with anger as an involved emotion. And I think that's where I get frustrated. Is what
Totally. I think what I would say is that it would take the wind out of the sails. Like it would, yes, it would totally kill the mood. I don't.
Well, no, it would more than kill the mood. Uh-huh. It would yes, it would 100% kill the mood. And then I would get sexually frustrated because I'm just like, can we not just, can you not just communicate and then make sure that you're seeking consent? And can we not just do the thing and have fun? Mm-hmm. And it just became so complicated. And I was just like, why is all of a sudden it's complicated and you're angry? Like, why?
Yeah. No, we went through a period of time where it would get complicated, and I wish we could go back and just be in the moment, but I got in my head, or I would make it complicated, and it would, like you said, it would kill the mood. It'd make us each frustrated, and we would express that frustration differently. That's a lesson learned.
Well, but it's just about, because again, I'm very direct in my communication, and I'm particularly so when it comes to sex. This is what I want. That doesn't feel good. This does feel good. Continue. Please stop. Mm-hmm. Can we change this? Can we do this? Like,
which is great. I think it's wonderful to.
Go ahead, please.
I mean, I think to kind of add on what I was saying, and it's something that touches just about every aspect of all the conversations we have, is communication. I need to grow with communication, with better communication. And when I'm not being direct, when I'm not seeking consent or doing, seeing how things are going, everything in a relationship suffers, including sex and intimacy.
Yeah. 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 And I think, again, we've come a long way, but I think that's where it has gotten frustrating, is where there is that disconnect in the communication. And then when things just get complicated, and I'm just like, can we not just have sex? Do we have to tie it, right, to a connectivity? And even more so, where our dynamic has struggled, and to circle back to what I was saying about before, where when we are under duress, or when you have not been your best self and really added value to the partnership, you would kind of try to reconnect during sex. And during sex, you would consistently ask me to be the most vulnerable.
I can see I can see how the two don't align.
And so I was just like, what the heck is this? Mm-hmm. Like, right? Because, so penetrative sex for a lot of women can't produce an orgasm, right? Or it can with certain toys and with certain positions and things like that, but it tends to be longer. And so a lot of couples choose to, and we were one of those couples, choose to mix penetrative sex with oral sex, right? And that's as graphic as I will get, because I don't want this episode to have to be marked explicit or something. Even though this is all sex therapy, couples therapy 101. But even then, and so whenever oral sex is involved, it is more vulnerable. It is the more intimate of the two, because you can do penetrative sex in a number of ways and not even look at a person, not even have to have any kind of emotional connection, right? Not even make eye contact. So the vulnerability can be there in penetrative sex, but it can also not be there, right? Choice of the people involved in that sex session, if you will, for lack of better terminology that I couldn't come up with on the spot. And then you have oral sex, which is on either partner, which is the most intimate. That also is typically the quickest and most consistent way for orgasm for both the female and the male body, right? And so, but I would say in particular for the female body, oral sex tends to be able to produce orgasm with more consistency. And so with that all being said, there is, at least in our dynamic, you would try to connect with me, and like, I wouldn't say but like, no, I don't even want to say get back in my good graces. It was more so like we have been disconnected. I have been disappointed in you. I have been frustrated with you. And you would always go for oral sex. And I would always be like, no, that's the vulnerable
and
one.
I'm not, yeah.
I don't want to be vulnerable with you. I am willing to have sex. Not willing. A lot of times I would like to have sex, but I don't want to do the vulnerable type of sex. I would like to do penetrative sex. And you would get mad and you'd get super frustrated because
I was trying to reconnect. Yeah.
And I was just like, no, you have to do the work to reconnect before this moment. Because now in this moment, it just got complicated. And now I don't want either. And I wanted sex, and now I'm sexually frustrated because I'm going to bed without anything. And I would get mad. Is this accurate?
Accurate.
And so, like, I feel like, yes, you have to communicate during the sex, but really, also communication comes beforehand.
For sure.
And if you're wanting the vulnerable form of sex, especially oral sex,
I feel like the steps throughout the day, you needed to be on point. You needed to be on point.
yes. But even if you're
You
not,
just needed to connect.
Yes.
You just needed that connection beforehand.
but I would even challenge that, like, there's no need for perfectionism. It's not like if you've been a jerk all day and then it's shot for the night. You just have to resolve before we get to the place of sex. But that's, I feel like, has taken you a long time, years to understand.
Yes, that's true statement. I still sometimes feel, though, that if the day doesn't, we tend not to have sex as a makeup. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
We don't do makeup
We don't do
sex.
makeup sex.
Because I have strong feelings about makeup sex, but I won't get into them here.
But I'm
it's
just
not
saying,
for me.
yeah, I was just saying we don't do that.
No.
So oftentimes with that in mind is, I think in my complex inner workings is like, oh, if I messed up here, I got to get a couple more good check marks on the good side. Otherwise it's not happening tonight.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, one, it's not check marks. That's a problem. And then two, it's not happening tonight. Again, because you always want the more vulnerable of them. And so it's just like, it's like you will say no to penetrative sex, even if oral sex is off the table. Sometimes
Really?
if we're not, because you get into, you're like, yeah, but I really want to connect. I really want to give you pleasure. I really want this with you. And I'm like, okay, cool. But like, you didn't do the work to reconnect us. If that's what you wanted, cool. But then you need to do the work to heal the fact that you've been a jerk all day. Does this make sense?
That makes sense.
Communicate on it.
I think it's a good call out. I think it's something I need to definitely be more mindful of. With you kind of calling it out and bringing it to the attention.
Because I think I feel like a lot of times the women in heterosexual relationships get the shaft in terms of, it's always assumed that, like, they're always the ones saying no to sex because they're tired or because they're overparented. I made that term up. I don't know if that's a real term. They've been parenting too much, or they've been working too hard, or of that. And to be fair, that is true, and that is valid reasons to want to have sex. But for me, there's oftentimes I want to just have the pleasure and the fun, and I'm just like, but what?
You don't want to go through the steps. You don't.
I don't want. I'm like, why does it have to be connecting and romantic and just like where we just have to be each other's besties, friends, and I just like. And, like, why does it always have to be the oral, vulnerable form of sex, right? And it's like, I'm down with the vulnerable forms of sex when you have been kind to me that day and you have been patient, and when you haven't been reactive about something, or you haven't triggered me into something else, or when you've communicated really, really well. But when you haven't communicated well, and we've had a number of incidences and you haven't repaired because you've chosen not to repair, you've chosen to be avoidant, and then you come in propositioning sex, I'm like, I don't want to be vulnerable with you. And then you'll be like, okay, well, then I'm not interested. And it's
I
just
don't know if
like,
do I ever say that? Do I ever?
I wouldn't, no, you're not that direct in
No.
your communication, but you get frustrated and pouty. And then I have to navigate frustrated and pouty. And I'm just like, what goes through my head is like, you're a gosh darn grown ass male. Stop and just communicate.
Call me out. Call me out next time.
But I mean, I do though. You don't think I call you out?
In those moments, I don't think you do.
Fair. I think it. You're a delicate flower, honey. I feel like I can't.
I can be complicated. I can be complicated when it comes to sex.
We are all complicated, but
Oh, yes, for sure.
but when it comes to sex, I would say that you're more than complicated. You get touchy. You get very touchy about it. And so so what am I calling out? What are you wanting me to call out?
I'm wanting you to call out when we haven't been connected and we're going in for sex. Call out like I'm just wanting the action tonight. Like just get her done.
Okay. And you'll think you'll perceive that well? I'm down. I am totally down to do that. But right now, in case the video isn't on Michael, he is looking up like, am I real? Is that really?
I'm looking
what
up
I
and to the
want?
left, I think.
Yeah, you're looking up to the left and you're just kind of like, okay, I just told Allie to do that.
I think give it a whirl. Let's see how that plays out.
But what's going through your head? Why don't you think it will work?
I think it will work. I'd like to think it'll work.
I know, but go a step further for me. Do you think the barriers for that working?
As you said, I can get complicated. I get touchy, and it's like it's an out of body experience. Like, and I don't know what that brain is thinking in that moment. I can't.
I mean, for me, it just feels like you tie sex so much to love.
I do.
So much to
I
love.
do, and I have to at times I have to disassociate the two.
Why can't it just be lust?
It can be, and
But
I think
it can't with you.
I don't know if that's.
But think about it, babe. If you can't have sex for just the physicality, and there has to be an emotional component with it. There has to be the connection, and I love this person. I'm in love with this person, and this person is my partner and my lover and all the things. Lust fits in there, but I can only think of a couple of times maybe where it was allowed to just be lust.
I would like for it to just be lust at times.
But again, so then what are the barriers for us getting there and being able to just do? Because that is my mindset. We've already established this. Whereas, like,
if you can identify what they are, I would love to know on what those barriers are.
But this is where I don't want to be a therapist in my own relationship.
Well, let's have the conversation as non-therapists with each other. Like, can you take your therapist hat off and set it aside?
But I think that's hard for us to do because you struggle so much to talk about sex. And so it feels like we can only talk about it when we're in a clinical type of capacity. We're like here on strangely enough, a live-ish podcast, right? Like, I mean, it's not live. It can be edited out, but we don't edit the stuff out, really. So, like,
I'd like to have those conversations. I'd like to figure out why and what those barriers are. Because I can, in my mind, think of times when it was lust and it was great.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm down.
I am too.
To kind of, because I feel like that falls a little bit more in my active thinking. We're like, yes, sometimes I do want the connection.
Other times you just want
And
the
other
fun.
times I don't.
Yeah.
And there's times when I'm willing to be vulnerable with you because I feel like you are safe and you are loving and you have sought appropriate consent. And there's other times where I'm just like, no, I don't want to be vulnerable with you, but I do want the fun and I do want the end result. And can we just, to your point, get to it, not have to do the stuff. If you haven't noticed, folks, I am not the romantic one in the relationship. Michael is the one. I find romance, I don't know. That's probably some trip up on my end or something like that. But I also, romance to me can be, I have seen it in a lot of my couples be used as a manipulator. And so I think I don't get fooled as quickly.
Do you
That
feel I
sounded
tried?
judgmental. To say people are fooled by romance sounded judgmental. I want to strike that. Like I just romantic gestures don't have the same impact for me than you coming and really directly communicating with me and like me being seen and heard.
Do you feel I use romance as a manipulator in our relationship?
I don't know if you use it as a manipulator. I think you sometimes use it as a scapegoat or a cover, not a cover up, but like oh, I may have really broken your trust and crossed a boundary here, but look at the nice thing I did when it comes to sex. And it's just a romance or like, and I'm just like, okay, those two are not tied. I don't want them tied. I want you to heal and fix this so that we can just decide things and have fun together without all the, I don't know. I feel like they're distractions to the actual relationship for me, for
Okay.
us. But that's not for everyone. And so before we kind of close down, I want to touch base on consent because I know that was a notion that was foreign for you and you really struggled kind of understanding how that could be romantic, to use that term, and or more so how it could be
It'd
a
be sexy.
connector,
That could
how
be.
it could be sexy, how it could actually make me more lustful to know that consent was sought versus consent not never existing. So care to elaborate on kind of that shift for
Yeah,
you?
no, it's definitely been an area where I've grown as your partner. Um, I oftentimes you just kind of take things. I would take things as they would come, and I wouldn't say, "Hey, can I do this?" And if I hadn't asked and I started doing it, sometimes you'd be like, "Whoa, hold on there! Like, what's?" I think
And then you'd get your feelings hurt.
right. I feel rejected.
100%.
And I've come to learn that there are ways in which you can ask that can keep this, the sexual emotion going and not be a turnoff. I used to think of it as a turnoff. Like I couldn't think of how to approach it from a way. I think in my mind, I just wanted it to kind of be natural and going with the flow and just how things progress in the movies. And you didn't see that really in the movies. So,
Which is,
which
side
is,
note, which is why our society is kind of messed up. And why there's so much sexual violence is because you don't see it in the
yeah.
movies.
So it was definitely an area of growth.
Yeah, and I think you have come to kind of be able to see that when you are seeking consent and I give consent, I my lust increases, I get more turned on because I feel like
You feel
I'm in
safe.
control and
Mm-hmm.
I'm safe.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm in control. No
Mm-hmm.
one has control over my body but me. I get to say what feels good and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Completely.
the person that I'm having the experience with is respecting that and wants me to have a good experience. So they're honoring what I am asking for.
Absolutely.
And that is a major turn on.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is honoring what you're asking for, if you say, I want this, and they're saying, absolutely. And if you say, I don't want this, and they're like, of course, what about this? Like, that is very attractive.
No, it's empowering, and I can totally see that's true. It's an accurate statement.
But I think to your point, that notion around consent being a sexual igniter versus like a wet blanket was, it took a while for you to kind of really understand that and adjust to that. Because again, like you kind of alluded to at the top of this podcast, that they don't show that in movies
Mm-hmm.
or in media or anything like that. Again,
Sad.
which is really sad.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's why so many people have the sexual experiences that they have that can be damaging and can really be harmful to their future dynamics and or association with sex. And I know we're coming to the end of this conversation. I feel like so much can be said about sex that because it is it's an interesting topic. It's also a topic that is entwined with majority of romantic relationships. It's really, in a lot of relationships, what differentiates platonic versus romantic, right? Like most people partner in marriage in other ways so that they can have a consistent sex partner. And then, again, we'll have an episode on ethical non-monogamy because those are people who utilize sex in a not in a different fashion, but really kind of have sex the component of sex in a different capacity than monogamous relationships. But what are some thoughts that you want to leave for listeners when it comes to sex and marriage, and from your perspective and how it has just differed and grown, knowing especially coming from the lack of education you've had to coming through on this end?
I think, I think communication, like you mentioned, is just very intertwined in it, in terms of not just the consent, but the leading up to it, the building up of the attraction and the lust or the desire. Sex is a physical act. It can be primal, it can be romantic and very sensual. Ideally, I'd like to think it's a combination thereof. I enjoy our sex, and it's a vulnerable thing. For me, it's what differentiates a friend relationship from a romantic relationship. So I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's healthy for relationships, in my opinion.
That would be. For those listening, it doesn't have to. Yeah. Again, I think this is where Michael and I differ on some of our things, because if it's what you're wanting in a romantic relationship, but just because someone isn't having sex a couple times a week or even once a month does not mean the relationship isn't healthy and it's not romantic.
Completely
Like,
agree. I have friends that don't have it very frequently, except on special occasion, and they enjoy their relationship and that they're happy. So
And
I can
so,
acknowledge that
yeah.
there's the two don't need to be mutually exclusive.
But for you, it does. And that's what you were saying, right? Is for you, there needs
For
to,
me, it's part of our relationship.
yeah. And there needs to be consistency in it and frequency in it in order for you to feel like our relationship is healthy, is always the notion I have gotten from you.
There's a certain amount of truth to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And and again, as we kind of wrap up, this is what's so interesting about this topic is for those who are familiar with Esther Perel's work, she has a number of books about how the romantic relationships and marriages have shifted and how we put so much pressure on our marriages to be all encompassing, where really a husband and wife were bound together so that they could produce children, continue their lineage. And like, if there was romance involved, great. If there was friendship involved, even better. But like, there was no expectation for it. Now, in the romances and marriages that we have today, we expect our husband, wife, partners to be all encompassing. They're supposed to be our lover, give us great sex. They're supposed to be our friend. They're supposed to be able to listen to us and support us and do all these things. They're supposed to give us children if that's what we're wanting to do. They're supposed to be able to do well at a dinner party or, or have their own friends and their own hobbies and their own lives. But we also need to have mutual hobbies, right? There's so much pressure now on today's relationships. And her books are interesting for those who are readers. It's something to check out. But I think we can sometimes, again, it's a journey for us, and where we can struggle is where I feel like I more align and better. I wouldn't say I understand. I'm more aligned with the notions that partners aren't supposed to be all encompassing, and that we create the relationships that we want and that serves us. Whereas I feel like you tend to fall back on that more, what has become a traditional in the last 70 years or 50 years of a relationship or a marriage being all of these things. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that's really where the sex component can really play in. Because I feel like sometimes the ask is that I am a parent to our children. I also have to make sure I'm bringing in enough money to pay my half of the bills and to do all that stuff. I'm a contributor to the home. I also have to be your lover and your friend. And sometimes those can't all coexist, which is where I'm just like, okay, well, let's just do the physical activity then.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you start to pull in that romantic notion, which again, I think is common.
Mm-hmm.
And so any kind of closing words for folks related to that?
I think, like I've asked you, I think to call it out in those moments. I think that there would be a welcoming of, I just right now want the physicality of it, because we're not connected, or I've overparented for the day, or whatever it is. I think just to communicate it in the moment and see if you can't satisfy that physical desire.
Yeah. Oh, sex, it's a doozy. And it's just, again, relationships are what you need them to be. And I just challenge everyone to make sure they're cultivating what works for them, that you're having conversations with your partner about what is working for you, what isn't, and that, like you'll see with Michael and I, we come from very different experiences, but we also have different paradigms and thought processes around sex. And we don't quite follow the stereotype that people often label with, right? And so it's just about making sure you are communicating and that you are creating the relationship and the sexual life that you want to have within your dynamic, right? And just kind of coming with that. And so next time we are going to talk about intimacy. Again, I've called out that they are not always tied, that sex is often a part of intimacy, but intimacy is a much larger component, and how we really connect with the people we want to be connected with. And so for those who haven't watched our episodes, the Married to a Shrink podcast is associated with a larger brand of online relationship courses for those who just would like a little more guidance and insight at a self-paced dynamic towards their own relationships. But we also have, for our single Austinites, we have matchmakers and coaches, dating coaches that are couples therapists. So people with extensive relational dynamic background who are working to match couples and to really guide people through the online dating scene so that they can really build the partnerships that they're wanting to build, and build the sex lives and build the relationships that they're wanting to build. So if you haven't checked that out, it's at lovelinesatx.com, and reach out if there's anything that we can do as a company or as a brand to kind of support you. And with that, to be continued for our conversation about intimacy next time on Married with a Shrink. Thanks for being here, babe. I know that you were dreading this conversation, and I know I felt your discomfort, and you were not as verbose as you normally are. And I feel like the beginning of this podcast. So hopefully you warmed up a little bit and felt a little bit more comfortable, but I definitely felt some tension. So
No, I was able to get by. I didn't have any liquid courage.
So thank you for being my partner. Thanks for going on this journey with me. And love you. Thank you.
Love you too.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.